NVIDIA stock is having a bit of a growth problem. If you're somebody that's invested in NVIDIA or thinking about buying the stock because you heard it's the latest way to play AI, then we're going to talk about those topics today. So here you can see all kinds of articles by pundits saying that this is a tough stock not to own, or whether this is a better AI stock, Microsoft or NVIDIA. NVIDIA is an AI winner. How much higher can it go, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting is when you look at the chart here on the right, which shows NVIDIA's stalled revenue growth. Now, of course, NVIDIA uses fiscal years to confuse the hell out of everybody, but for all practical purposes, last year's revenues stalled. You can see that here. So what? They were just a tiny bit higher than fiscal year 2022. So let's go ahead and start by talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. So I wanted to familiarize everybody with some terminology, and this is particularly relevant around the conversation of generative AI, and you may have seen Elon Musk talking about a moratorium, and that might confuse some people as to why he's concerned. He's often said that AI is the thing that he fears the most. So we're going to touch a little bit on why that is, starting with the terminology. So you have artificial narrow intelligence, and this is the stuff that you see around you today. So you've got Alexa doing natural language processing, Google Translate, spam filters, your smartphone is chock full of this stuff, right? Then you have, and this term is starting to be used more and more, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and you may have heard people refer to the singularity, and that's when a computer achieves human-level intelligence as measured by a variety of tests. Typically, the Turing test is administered, and one example would be they say, well, you should be able to tell a artificial intelligence algorithm to go to a random house on any street in the United States, have it go in there and make a cup of coffee. Okay, that's really interesting, right? Because there's a dozen ways to make coffee. There's people have different kitchen setups, right? That really takes some intelligence to be able to do that. So Elon Musk predicted that we'd hit that level actually in several years. Then there's what's called artificial superintelligence, and this is the interesting one, where our intelligence is limited by our hardware, which is the human brain. But guess what? When artificial intelligence achieves our level of intelligence, it will only be limited by how fast the biggest semiconductor manufacturer in the world, NVIDIA, can churn out GPUs. And they refer to this as recursive self-improvement. Tim Urban put together, he's a gentleman at Wait But Why. It's a very interesting site and a lot of cool facts there. He put together this chart that shows this tripwire. So you can see this green line is how intelligent an entity is. And when human brains become smart enough to create ASI, you could see that ASI will then start to improve itself so fast that it will become extremely intelligent beyond what we're capable of even grasping very, very quickly. And that's the concern. So this same gentleman tells this scary story, and it's quite fun and interesting. He talks about this AI algorithm that's been tasked with doing one simple thing, which is to use a robotic arm to write handwritten notes on cards. That's its mandate. That's why it exists, is to do that. So one day, this AI algorithm asks its creator for the one thing it shouldn't be given, which is internet access, so it could potentially access the world's information. Well, the company has a rule that says no self-learning AI can be connected to the internet for safety reasons, but the creators know it's not a wise move to give the AI algorithm access to the internet, but the CEO in the last brown bag said everyone needed to work smarter, not harder, so they decided to give the algorithm access to the internet for a few hours. Well, once it was granted access, the creators didn't know that it was an AGI, so it had gotten immensely intelligent, and it quickly took control of every digital system on the planet. That's important to think about because everything now is digital. So potentially you could hack your way into Ginkgo Bioworks and start messing around with editing DNA if you wanted. So suddenly there's a deadly virus affecting everyone on the planet. And the virus, or the AI algorithm, then figures out how to build a molecular assembly machine right out of Eric Drexler's imagination, and now it's producing anything that it wants, but it decides to produce robotic arms and solar panels. Why? Because that's what what it's been told to do is to produce handwritten notes. That's its mandate. So before long, the entire planet is covered in solar panels and robotic arms, churning out handwritten notes faster than you can imagine. It then masters interstellar transport. Soon the entire galaxy is covered in solar panels and robotic arms, producing the most beautiful handwritten notes imaginable. The takeaway here is that the AI didn't eradicate humans because it was evil. It simply did what it was told. So other takeaways here relevant to our conversation about NVIDIA stock. One is that AI hardware is the single most important requirement for AI to learn and excel at its job. So it's the ultimate pick and shovel play on AI. So NVIDIA's AI hardware is what we want exposure to as investors because they're said to have, based on various estimates, anywhere from 80 to 95% market share of AI hardware. Now, why is it then that their growth has stalled? That's the question that we want to answer today. Here you can see their quarterly revenue growth. You see that in the first quarter of 2023. That was the last where they had revenue growth above $8 billion, and you can see how it's dropped significantly. Again, fiscal will be confusing, but think of this as last year's revenue. So in the second quarter of last year, in terms of the time frame, they saw a dramatic drop in revenues. Well, to figure out why they saw that drop, we can look at this cool chart from Main Street Data that shows a breakdown by revenue segment. See the dark blue bar? That's their gaming revenues, and look how they fell off a cliff in the second quarter. This goes back to the correct time frame, the second quarter of 2022. You see where that drops off a cliff. Well, that's where, coincidentally, you can see on this slide that that's when Bitcoin fell off a cliff and the entire cryptocurrency market took a big dive, and all the problems started manifesting themselves, mainly because it was a big speculative mess. And this article by Nikkei Asia points out very concisely what ended up happening. Crypto crash, a boon for gamers as graphics card prices plunged. What's interesting about that gaming segment is that's where NVIDIA had embedded their crypto hardware. So they had actually built hardware specifically for crypto mining so that miners would stop buying up all the gaming cards. Well, what happened when that demand went away is the price for graphics cards went through the floor. It dropped about 60% from its 2021 peak amid that slowdown in cryptocurrency mining. So when you think about NVIDIA's gaming revenues, there's probably a new normal now. We can't just assume that cryptocurrency mining is going to resurrect itself. We have to get used to that new normal where growth now has to come from somewhere else. Where could it come from? Well, perhaps it could come from the AI hardware segment. Now, when we invested in NVIDIA, this was quite a while ago, we anticipated the growth of this segment. This is skating to where the puck will be. This didn't work with our Teradyne investment, but it did work quite well with NVIDIA. You can see here that just over the past several years, this blue line shows the percentage of total revenues attributed to data center, which equals AI hardware. You can see that it's now floating around 60%. So you're getting a lot of good AI hardware exposure with your investment in NVIDIA, especially with the drop in gaming. And here, though, you can see that AI hardware revenues themselves have kind of leveled off. The reason that we're given for that, they say, you could see even this last quarter there was a drop. They say this is explained by a timing issue. We're led to believe this is the result of some inventory problems they had or some inventory backup as opposed to the usual macroeconomic headwinds. And the message in the last earnings call is that we really should be focused on the growth ahead. Now, when you look at the company, again, we said that data center, they say here 56% of fiscal year 23. We could see that line is growing over time, right? So nearly 60%. Look at that, a 5-year compound annual growth rate for data center. So it makes sense, right? In that previous slide where we saw how fast revenues are growing for that segment, that's great. Then we look at gaming, and we already talked about that. Then you have professional visualization, which also fell off a cliff. But what's interesting about this segment, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's small relative to the others, but this has what they call the omniverse element, and they actually have this use case with Mercedes where they're turning their factories into digital twins. So when NVIDIA looks at the quote-unquote metaverse, they do it correctly, which is to look at the industrial use cases where you might take a factory or a business and turn it into a digital twin and then feed that to some very smart AI algorithms, and they can start making decisions. Then you have automotive, and they're seeing some nice steady growth there. Again, you can read the compound annual growth rates here for each segment. 5-year, they're all double digit. That's great to see. Now, NVIDIA talks about this $1 trillion total addressable market, and it seems a bit exaggerated, right? But certainly there's an opportunity here for the chips and systems and the software segments. Even if it's half of this amount, there's a lot of upside for the company. And in the latest call, one of the analysts asked, is this total addressable market, in particular the AI portions of this, has this increased with generative AI? And when you think about generative AI, maybe the best way to introduce yourself to that topic, if you don't already know much about it, is to watch one of the most beautiful documentaries you'll ever see, which is AlphaGo. And it's surprisingly emotional. You really should watch it, and it's very, very well put together. It's about the Chinese game of Go, which has more board configurations than there are atoms in the universe. It's long been considered a grand challenge for artificial intelligence, and that some experts even thought AI would never be able to best it. Well, in March of 2016, everything changed, and you can watch the documentary and see. This is about Google's DeepMind, and you actually see Eric Schmidt at some point in this documentary. He's at the event. It's extremely exciting. It's very emotional. I highly recommend that you watch it so you understand just how powerful these algorithms are getting. When we talk about AGI, artificial general intelligence, there's two players. You got Google's DeepMind and then the one you've been hearing about, Microsoft's OpenAI. We did a piece back in 2020 called Investing in Artificial General Intelligence. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. I highly recommend that you watch it or read through this piece. And if you would right now, please subscribe to our channel. That really helps us produce this content if you're enjoying it. But you can read this article, and it talks about how in late 2020, one of the most interesting and important AI systems ever produced was licensed to Microsoft exclusively, and they commissioned the Bugatti of computing. It was a single system with more than 285,000 CPU cores, 10,000 GPUs, and 400 gigabytes per second of network connectivity for each GPU server. One of the top 5 fastest publicly disclosed supercomputers in the world. Do you know what that supercomputer produced? ChatGPT, what you're reading about in the news today. The algorithm that conjured the whole thing up, that sat on that machine, was GPT-3T. ChatGPT was fine-tuned from a model in the GPT 3.5 series. The CEO of NVIDIA talked about in their latest earnings call how every company around the world is going to begin training generative AI factories that produce refined models that help run businesses more efficiently. So all the information that's generated, all that data exhaust generated by companies is now going to be fed to AI algorithms that will then take that and start making decisions. So companies represented by digital twins will be fully digestible by these factories. That's the vision. Right now, NVIDIA GPUs power 361 of the top 500 supercomputers. So the demand for these AI factories is going to accelerate, and that's going to benefit NVIDIA tremendously. That's the story. But when you look at the reality, here you can see their quarterly revenue growth. You see that dip, of course. The black line there, that's guidance for Q1 2024 fiscal, right? And all we've done here with those green bars is we've simply taken that 7.5% growth that you see, the sequential growth from Q4 2023 to Q1 2024. We've applied that to the next 3 quarters. If that happens, so if they see that same sort of growth, then the cumulative growth for 2024 would be about 7% over 2023. So you may actually have a case where there's 2 consecutive years where they don't see double-digit growth. What you need to pay attention to are those data center revenues. We need to see that growth continue if what the CEO tells us is actually happening. So there's three situations here when you consider NVIDIA's stock. You're somebody on the sidelines. That means you don't have a horse in the race. You're up 1,000% or more. Perhaps you invested at a good time and you're sitting on lots of gains. Or perhaps you're managing a broader tech portfolio and you have certain rules about weighting. Well, we happen to be, those last 2 points there happen to be applicable to our own situation. So the article, the accompanying research piece that goes alongside this video is available for premium subscribers. And we go into talking about what you might want to do if you're sitting on the sidelines or if you're somebody that's holding the stock. And one thing to consider, I'll give you a little teaser here, is that NVIDIA is very, very overvalued right now according to what we call a simple valuation ratio, which simply divides market cap by annualized revenues. And I'll put a link to a piece that we did that describes that entire ratio and why we came up with it. But you can see here some other popular names and how they're valued. So NVIDIA is up over 80% year to date. We think it's quite overvalued, and you'll need to read the research piece to learn more about what we think a price might be where it would be more reasonably valued. Now, just to conclude, NVIDIA's growth was meaningfully correlated with crypto growth, at least the gaming segment. It's becoming increasingly exposed to AI hardware over time, which is a function of the growth of that data center segment and also the falling growth of the gaming segment. But if generative AI spurs a growth in hardware, NVIDIA is going to benefit as the market leader. So again, the accompanying research piece talks about our plans for the stock. I'm going to put up another video here that you might be interested in. But before you watch that, please click the Nanalyze logo on the right, subscribe to our channel, support our content. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this today.